All right, guys. How you doing? Hope you're all hanging in there. I want to talk to you about a author real quick. We're going to be talking on Thursday on our Zoom meeting about a story by the author William Faulkner, and I'm going to be asking you today to read that story, at least start it, to have it ready by Thursday. It's a very famous story, his most famous, probably short story, and it's called A Rose for Emily. So this is William Faulkner right here. Uh, he is thought of often as, well, I don't know if I should say this, but I've heard many people call him America's greatest author. He's kind of up there as like, who is our best writer? That's, of course, always debatable, but William Faulkner is always a name that's up there. Just kind of the complexity of his writing and how he's able to do stuff that nobody else could really do. Um, so I want to talk to you about some of the characteristics of his writing. He is a modernist for sure, and he's one of the best American modernists, in my opinion. So let's just go through this step by step. You'll see the quote I have that goes along with him is this quote: "The past is never dead. It's not even past." Usually, when I do this as a presentation for my classes, I ask them what they think that means. The past is never dead, it's not even past. And often the response I get is, you're never really separated from the past. The present that you're living in is just a product of everything that's happened in the past. So you're always dealing with the past. So when he says it's not even past, at first that doesn't make sense, but then you realize, like, we don't at some point get through with the past. Everything we're dealing with now is a product of the past. So the past is intrinsically wrapped up in our experience of the present. And so that's something that's very important to William Faulkner. One big reason is because, when we read The Great Gatsby, we're going to be reading about F. Scott Fitzgerald and these kind of people that are living in New York, and they're Northerners. And we're going to see what it's like for the modern era in New York. But William Faulkner is a Southerner, and he's going to talk a lot about life in the South. And the American South is much different than the American North. It's almost like a different country. It's definitely a different culture. And its history is much different too. It's a place that has been decimated from the Civil War and is trying to rebuild, has this horrible history of slavery. So these things are always present. So when he says the past is never dead, and we're talking about a Southern writer, we know that they're probably going to have a lot of allusions to the war, to the antebellum South, of the slave owning South, and what that whole culture was built upon. So it's going to be a whole different tangle of history and myth and ideas that he's going to be dealing with. And one way he deals with this, and we have this as our first bullet point, is that he utilizes the stream of consciousness style in a lot of his writing. And one that we read a little snippet of last week when I did that kind of experimentation in modernism was from the novel The Sound and the Fury. I'm going to show you another clip from it real quick, or another passage from it. But this is probably his most famous novel, and it uses a lot of stream of consciousness writing in it. So I already talked about it, but he wrote about our connection to the past a lot, specifically the present and past of the American South. Almost all of his stories take place in a county in Mississippi that he created called Yoknapatawpha County. It's a really long name. Most of his stories take place there in different points of history. Sometimes they have recurring characters. And he often writes in this stream of consciousness style of writing, which can make it fairly interesting and at times brilliant, but often hard to read. A Rose for Emily, the book we're going to be reading, is not written in stream of consciousness style. However, it's not as easy of a read as, say, Ernest Hemingway. So, also, some of his famous works, I mentioned The Sound and the Fury. I love this book. I've read it a couple times. I know that makes me sound super smart. It was assigned to me in two different college courses to read it, so it's not like I'm just sitting there like I'm really cool. Light in August, I was also assigned to read, but I did enjoy it. As I Lay Dying, I did read on my own, and it's probably my favorite Faulkner novel. Absalom, Absalom, I have been assigned to read in at least 2 different uh, classes, and I've never finished this book. It is a hard book to read, and I always get, frustrated, and then I have to move on with my life and do other things. So I still have yet to finish Absalom. Absalom, I've read half of it twice, just the first half. All right, let me give you a tiny glance again at some of his writing style. Again, too, this isn't going to be really representative of what we see in A Rose for Emily, but this is from Sound and the Fury. I'm going to read it to you, then I'll explain it to you. "Wait a minute," Luster said. "You snagged on that nail again. Can't you never crawl through here without snagging on that nail?" "Caddy uncaught me and we crawled through. Uncle Maury said to not let anybody see us, so we better stoop over," Caddy said. Now, the reason I show this to you is this is the part from the first chapter. There's only 4 chapters in The Sound of the Fury. And what you might not be able to tell is that this first part where this guy Luster is talking, this takes place where the main character, Benji, is 33 years old. Down here, this takes place when the main character, Benji, is about, 12 or 13. I don't know. He's much younger. It could be 20 years earlier. We have no idea that the time has passed here, other than the fact that we went into italics. That's his little clue for us, that now we've shifted time into a different time. Now, the reason why it's told this way, or one of the reasons, is because Benji, this is from his point of view, is a mentally handicapped man. He's 33, but he has the mind of maybe like a 3 or 4-year-old. And he remembers things, and the writing is actually fine. You can read it, but he never gives any context for what he's telling you. He never explains anything to you. He just gives you these images, and it bounces around in his memory whenever something happens. So like here, when Luster says, "Can't you stop getting snagged on that nail?" he all of a sudden remembers this time with his sister Caddy where he was caught on a nail crawling through something. So the memories keep bouncing off of each other, and we try to make sense of it. This is another type of stream of consciousness writing, because one big thing with stream of consciousness is this idea of memories kind of setting off other memories, and we follow those paths of thought because that's kind of how we think. So that's a little introduction to William Faulkner here. I hope you enjoy A Rose for Emily. Make sure you read the whole thing. Give yourself a bit of time to read it too, because it's a little bit longer than, say, the Hemingway stories we've been reading. But it's one of my favorite short stories, and William Faulkner is one of my favorite writers, even though he can be tough sometimes. All right, guys, I look forward to seeing you and talking to you on Thursday.